So, Reicher and Laban, as we stop there, let's move forward, and we're going to talk about Reicher's social norm theory. So, there was a theory of pathologization that worked on imitation and sympathy to transmit this, right, the emotion and context of the crowd through irrationality and submersion. But Reicher wants to be a little more process-oriented to this explanation. The pathologization, like a virus moving through a population, is one process model, but I think it doesn't give us a lot of explanatory potential. So let's take a look at what Reicher's got here. And he says that there are norms that guide crowd behavior. And this is something you would probably observe if you were to look at the riots that were so common to Ohio State students back in 2003, 2004, when people would riot after football games and burn down Chittenden, set cars afire, turn them over, take the couches off the porch and burn them up, right? What kind of norms might facilitate that type of behavior or guide that behavior? And Reicher lays it out pretty simply. Step one is milling. And this is before action takes place. Crowd members listen to each other. They're all milling about, right? But then through the conversation, then someone can emerge as a keynote speaker and proposes action to resolve the ambivalence, because the crowd is ambivalent. What are we going to do? Why are we here? What's up? What are we feeling, right? And then we got someone who might emerge and say, this is what we're about, and this is what we should do about it. And people in their state of heightened affect are looking to release that affect, and here comes the keynote speaker to propose the methodology for reducing the tension that's associated with that increase in affect, that tension. And notice we're still talking really kind of in Freudian terms, at least loosely. But it still fails to account for social cultural context as a contributing variable in this regard. So let's talk a little bit about the social identity theory of crowd action. It explains why group members, how group membership affects people. That is, being a member of a group automatically increases someone's self-esteem, right? And so this is... Think about it, it's kind of a trade-off, man. I feel good about being a member of this group, and if I have to give up some of my individuality, maybe it's a worthwhile trade-off. Now, some of us are pretty prone to joining groups and immersing ourselves in groups. Others of us, and it's an individual difference, are not so swayed and remain free agents or independent agents. Some of us actually derive self-esteem from going counter to a majority group. So individual differences will never escape in a discussion of psychology. Now, but let's say we're merging with a group. As we merge with a group, developing an in-group identity, we engage in self-stereotyping. So that is, we start engaging in behaviors that are thought to be group behaviors. And by engaging in those behaviors, then we reinforce that we are a member of that group. And it's like, okay, so you're a member of this group? Well, if you're a member of this group, then you need to behave like you're a member of this group. So we adopt the stereotypes of the group and we make them stereotypes of the self, and they begin to guide our behavior, right? So if this group is assholes and unkind to members of the out-group, how do I ensure my membership? How do I solidify my membership? Then I need to start taking action against the out-group members. I need to become more aggressive. I need to become more unkind. And then that reinforces the elements of my group and my membership of the group. So we see it leading to significant observed extremism and polarization. And I think this is the sad story of the last 2 or 3 years. We see this increasing desire to become members of groups, and we see that the groups cannot see any way to coexist. They become increasingly polarized, and at some point the Nazi Germans said, no, we cannot coexist with Jews. We cannot coexist with communists, and our only course of action is to eliminate the other group. And that's where it plays out to its most extreme form, something that Gordon Allport has a lot to say about. As a result, social identification has transformatory potential capable of producing some level of identity change. So my group membership can actually kind of work backwards and cause me to change my personal individual identity to be more similar to the group identity. We call this self-stereotyping. Right? It can be simple and it can be innocuous, right? I'm a teacher. I belong to the group of teachers. So I start engaging in behaviors that are more stereotypical of teachers, which reinforces my membership in the world of teachers, right? So, what does a transformation have to do with emotion? Because we probably need to get back to that. Within the event, emotional contagion can be observed. So the group emotions now, through sympathy and imitation, are being demonstrated by most of us in the group. Social identity can be associated to different emotional responses based on self-stereotype and the stories associated with the group. So if a group, admires toughness and harshness, or one thing that I think is driving some of the group division and the polarization is some people are saying, well, it's good to be kind to other people and it's good to understand how people want to be treated and try to treat them that way. Other people call that, well, no, I want to say what's on my mind and I'm tired of being forced to be politically correct and not say what I feel. So I think political correctness is a fascinating feature in this day and age because you have people who say, well, we should be kind to others. And then we have other people who say, fuck kindness. Oh, drop the F-bomb, sorry about that. I don't do that too often. But the idea is that no, I'm tired of being forced to be kind to people I don't like. If I want to be unkind, then I'm going to be unkind, and no one's going to tell me otherwise, right? And then we see this division, this polarization begin, right? So moderate elements in the group feel they might have a legitimate position, but it's hard to express that position because when you're the moderate element, when you're kind of saying, well, yeah, then people want to force you to take sides, right? One way or the other. So once a group's perceived as a threat, impeding the group becomes central. The police response, which the group perceives as legitimate. So we've seen this. We have people protesting, and we have the police controlling the protest. And it becomes more extreme in their behavior towards each other as time goes on. Right? Solidarity, willingness to challenge the outgroup increase, and this would be felt and displayed in emotional responses. So if we look at Reicher, there we go, and group emotions, we can see cognition and emotion processes at work. Well, the cognition may initially bind the group. That is, this is what we're about. This is the narrative. This is why we've come to be. This is our role in the world, right? This is what we should do, right? That's what gets us together. But the emotions that we experience, the imitation, the sympathy mechanisms then cause us really to understand where we're coming from and what we're about at a deeper level. We experience a joy in becoming members of the group, right? And anger at outgroup attempting to interfere with the expression of in-group emotion, right? And let me give you a quick example here.
Get him out. Ready? Are you ready? Get him out of here. Get him out of here. Get the hell out of here.
So, as Trump in this case at one of his rallies is yelling, "Get him out of here!" Right? That's a dissenting voice. Get him out of here! Get him out of here! And every time he says that, the crowd gets a little louder in response. Right? So it's this manipulating the emotion against the outgroup. Right? Now, Reicher presents then a less mindless group contagion that relies on social variables to a greater degree than Le Bon. It is maybe one of the contrasting aspects there. So, now, I want to have a little fun here. I'm gonna try playing this. Let's see how it works sound-wise. Maybe I'm gonna put this right there. See how it works. This is a TED Talks from Derek Stiver. I'm thinking, I love this thing. This is one of my favorites. Sit down. It's about 5 minutes. Pause it and get yourself a cup of coffee you want. But I think this is freaking hilarious. If I can run it at all.
gentlemen, at TED we talk a lot about leadership and how to make a movement. So let's watch a movement happen, start to finish, in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons from it. First, of course, you know, a leader needs the guts to stand out and be ridiculed. But what he's doing is so easy to follow. So here's his first follower with a crucial role. He's going to show everyone else how to follow. Now notice that the leader embraces him as an equal. So now it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Now there he is calling to his friends. Now if you notice that the first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. It takes guts to stand out like that. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. And here comes a second follower. Now it's not a lone nut, it's not two nuts, 3 is a crowd, and the crowd is news. So a movement must be public. It's important to show not just the leader, but the followers, because you find that new followers emulate the followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, and immediately after, 3 more people. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point. Now we've got a movement. So, notice that as more people join in, it's less risky. So those that were sitting on the fence before now have no reason not to. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, but they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. So, over the next minute, you'll see all of the those that prefer to stick with the crowd, because eventually they would be ridiculed for not joining in. And that's how you make a movement. But let's recap some lessons from this. So, first, if you are the type, like the shirtless dancing guy, that is standing alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals. So it's clearly about the movement, not you. Okay, but we might have missed the real lesson here. The biggest lesson, if you noticed, did you catch it? Is that leadership is over-glorified. That yes, it was the shirtless guy was first, and he'll get all the credit, but it was really the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. So as we're told that we should all be leaders, that would be really ineffective. If you really care about starting a movement, have the courage to follow and show others how to follow. And when you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first one to stand up and join in. And what a perfect place to do that at TED. Thanks.
Okay, is that absolutely amazing or what? And I love Derek Stiver's presentation on that, the thinking behind it. And it's a novel idea, so too cool. And hey, maybe you're not going to be the leader necessarily in everything you do, but being the first follower might actually demonstrate greater power. And that leads us kind of to a discussion of emotional contagion. I'll post the link for that too, in case whatever I did here didn't work out too well. I'll post it with the lecture video. So, primitive emotional contagion. There's the book, Emotional Contagion. I don't know what that guy's doing on the cover of the book. That's just freaking crazy looking. But Hatfield, Cacioppo, Rapson wrote the book in 1994. Literally wrote the book, yeah, so not cliche. And again, I talked about John Cacioppo. Rest in peace. He died, 2 years ago of cancer. And he was quite young, and that was a horrible loss to us all. So they rely heavily on mimicry and synchrony in their explanations of emotional contagion, right? And these can be facilitated by facial, vocal, and postural mechanisms. We see that Hitler traveled with a photographer throughout his career, and he had the photographer take pictures of him during his famous beer hall speeches throughout Munich when he was first getting started. And Hitler studied these pictures, and he worked on his gestures, he worked on his intonation. He had very, very specific speaking techniques, and it was to kind of create the fodder that people could imitate, right? And that's so he's kind of the primary virus holder that's trying to transmit this virus through this contagion process of mimicry and synchrony. The process is multiply determined, and I remember Cassiopo talking to us and using that term. It was one of his favorite terms, I think. The process is multiply determined rather than on a single variable explanation. So how this works, and if it does work successfully, relies on a series of variables, not just a single one. So emotions are caught is where we can come from here. It's a cognitive conscious process, thinking, imagining, perspective taking, analysis, and this might be akin to Hume's sympathy. We're not leaving these guys, behind that we've talked about earlier in the course. We should probably continue to honor them with some reflection. Conditioned and unconditioned emotional responses, and notice the operant or classical condition, Pavlovian or Skinnerian conditioning, right, it can happen. So this is standard stuff, but emotion in one may lead to a different emotion in another. And note that when we look at associations, then an anger display from me might create a fear response in another. And then the process of mimicry and feedback is often an automatic process. But, we're sounding, well, this sounds pretty conceptual and it sounds pretty cognitive. Is this actually primitive? And yeah, if we look at Tanya Chartrand, who came to Ohio State, her first job as a professor, she got out of graduate school, immediately came to Ohio State's social psychology program. She was a rising star, no two ways about it. Was a graduate student under John Barge, who is considered the father of modern automaticity or automatic processes. So let's think about Sigmund Freud and the unconscious, right? We get out of the 30s into the 40s, and then especially into the 50s, Freud is discarded. What's this unconscious? You can't prove it exists. You can't empirically demonstrate the unconscious, right? So the unconscious was discarded as fluff, and Freud was largely just ignored. People held their nose when they talked about Freud. But you get into the 1980s, and Ullman and Barge wrote this book called The New Unconscious. And in this, they re-embraced the unconscious, and laboratory techniques could demonstrate how the unconscious operated. Now, you'll see a lot of us modern day social psychologists like me adopted the term non-conscious. So rather than talk unconscious and pre-conscious, we just kind of move that away. We don't want to be associated with Sigmund Freud necessarily. I don't care, but a lot of people don't want to be associated with the unscientific Sigmund Freud, so we're going to now rename this thing the non-conscious, and we can start to explore it. Tanya came. I was a first-year graduate student, and the classes we took with her on automaticity and automatic processes inspired all of us to use like priming in our research studies to explore the non-conscious, right? So the primitive is the automatic non-conscious, and one of, I think, Tanya's just masterful experiments was the chameleon effect. And what they did was they bring people into the laboratory, and you're told, hey, you're going to have to work on this project with a partner for a half hour, right? And what they did, the manipulation that Tanya created, was half the time that the Confederate was in there, the participant was either randomly assigned to the Confederate condition where the Confederate would rub their face like this, right? And the other half the time the participant would have been randomly assigned to a Confederate who was shaking their foot. And during this half-hour interaction that was being videotaped, the dependent measure was, does the participant then go on to mimic the behavior of rubbing the face or mimic the shaking of the foot? And sure enough, the participants tended to mimic that behavior at a significant level. So then Tanya asked the question, and here's where she's a masterful researcher. She says, well, so they mimic. What the hell's the point? So she wanted to establish, what does it do? So now she flips the study around, again, masterful, and the Confederate half the time is told to mimic a behavior of the participant. The other half is the non-mimicry, the control condition, where the Confederate does not mimic the participant. After the half hour of working together is over, they leave, and on the way out, the participant is asked a couple questions. One have been, would you rate how smoothly the interaction went? And would you also rate how much you liked working with your partner? And in the mimicry condition, two things occurred. That is, greater liking and a greater perception of smoothness of the interaction. So not only do people mimic, but Chartrand was able to demonstrate the purpose or the functional aspects of mimicry. That is, things seem to go smoother when mimicry is occurring and liking is increased. So this is one way that group contagion, right, can operate. And this is at the dyadic level, but it will work at the group level as well, that through this process of non-conscious mimicry, we feel closer to those that we're mimicking, or closer to those that have mimicked us. Fascinating idea. So, more to emotion contagion than just this disease-like pathological spreading, right? That determines. We're very comfortable with the concept of going viral, but there's more to it than that. We're more complex, right? So Hatfield's theory is relatively micro-reductionist, and when we talk about reductionist theories, they tend to be not holistic, not looking at the big picture, but reducing it to these very minute psychological processes, which needs to be done, but then someone's got to come down and take those micro psychological processes and build them into a larger context. So Hess and Filippo, what we're talking about here then, emphasize the role of social norms and rules. That is, primitive mechanisms are subject to moderation based on social conventions. And as Elliot Aronson said, we are social animals. So again, the forces that operate on us, telling us what's okay, what's not okay, may have an impact into these automatic processes. So once expressed, it's that we have a greater ability to transmit info with technology, but less ability to transmit emotional information. So isn't it strange that if we look at the 1940s and 1930s, where we see Hitler and Mussolini effectively do this, will increased social media access cause this to happen differently? And information can be transmitted quite readily, but can emotional information be transmitted as well? Hang on, we're going to go to the next part.